Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Brooke Mitchell, and our webinar is Mexico's Monarch Sanctuaries Secret to the Butterfly Survival with our wonderful expedition leaders, Diana Lopez and Melissa Silva. Thank you both for being here today, Melissa and Diana. Over to you.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, everyone that is watching. So let's dive in with the information. Well, I'm Lisa. I'm a marine biologist, and I'm one of the expedition leaders for the Kingdom of the Monarch trips. So I'm very, very happy to be today with my friend and coworker Diana.
Okay, everyone, nice to meet you, and well, very happy to be part of this. I'm also an expedition leader for the Monarch trip, and very, very happy to be sharing this with Melissa. Thank you for the opportunity, and we hope that you enjoy this.
Thanks. So we want to do this. We wanted to do this webinar for all of you because we just finished the Monarch season. So we just came from great trips. We have fantastic views of the monarchs. We have fantastic new friends that we met on all of this during all these weeks. So we wanted to share with you what's going on with this area on the monarch life, with the sanctuaries, with the forests that we visit. So for that, we'll go over a little bit of the monarch biology, a little bit of the ecology. We'll dive in the overwinter insights, and then always it's very important to talk about the conservation actions that are done right now, that are being done, and the conservation actions that you can do as well. So for that, we will start. Diana, if you make the honor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, well, I wanted to share a little bit about the origin and the cultural aspects of the monarch butterfly because we know that it's been around for centuries, and not only here in Mexico, this culture representation is always, it has also been in other countries. And this is something that we really like to talk about, that the fact that it's the monarch butterfly, but it has so many different names all around the world. So there are other names as a wanderer or paloma, which is actually in Spanish, dove. But then we also know them a little bit as harvesters because they arrive actually in October, November when most of the agriculture cycles are finishing, especially the corn. So that's why they more or less linked it with the harvester, and we also know them as the daughters of the sun. So especially here in Mexico, there's different representations in different indigenous cultures. And for example, the daughters of the sun is known from the Masawa culture because they wake up from the clustering around spring, which is when we have like a lot of sunshine. So that's why they call it the daughters of the sun, and also because of the color. But also the fact that we call them monarchs, it comes from the Prince of Orange, later King William III, and most of the people that were coming into North America, migrating, they adored him so much that they wanted to call the butterflies monarchs in his honor. So Danites also, the name comes from a Greek legend that it has to do with two kings, twin kings from Egypt and Libani, that they had 50 daughters and 50 sons each. And another thing that is very beautiful here in Mexico is that the monarchs actually represent the souls of our dead that they come and visit for the Day of the Dead, that it actually happens to be more or less the same timing for the end of October, beginning of November. And there's a lot of mythology also surrounding in indigenous culture, and also from the pre-Hispanic times, the Aztecs and also Teotihuacanos have a lot of representations, not only in their garment but also in their weapons in all type of forms and colors. So let's keep on discovering a little bit more about the monarchs. Okay, next. Okay, so what are the monarchs? They are actually belonging to the order of Lepidoptera. So this is what pretty much groups the butterflies and the moths. And both of them happen to have wings with scales. So that is where the name comes out. And specifically from the family Nymphalidae. So this has to do with the brush-footed butterflies that we'll review in a second. And the scientific name is Anaus plexipus. So it has to do a little bit with this Greek mythology we were talking a little bit about, but it also has to do that Anaus, it actually means sleepy, and plexipus transformation. So now actually the cycle of the monarch has to do with their name. So the Danaus was sleepy, dormant when they're in the chrysalis, and plexipus because of the metamorphoses they go through transformation. Next. Okay, so we were talking about the wings that they are actually covered with tiny, tiny scales. And this is something very interesting because it's not only has to do with the color of the monarchs, with the melanin that it has, but also if you look at the figure on the left hand, it actually has like this irregular surface, and it also reflects the sun in certain colors. So the colors that we see in butterflies in general has to do with melanin, but also with the reflection of the sun on this irregular surface. And the scales can actually serve as to preserve the heat, but also to allow them to be more aerodynamic and to escape from possible situations like if they get entangled in a web, they can easily release themselves by leaving the scales on the web. Okay, next. Now we were talking about the brush-footed. So we call it that way because if you take a good look to this image, they actually have 6 feet. But the couple of feet that Melissa is pointing out on the red dot, and those are tiny, tiny feet that they actually look like T-Rex feet. And they actually look as if it was like a brush. That is why they have this name. And the butterflies are in the size more or less between 3 and 4 inches of their wingspan and 0.5 grams of weight. So they're very, very light. Next. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the difference between female and male butterflies. So if you take a good look to your left hand, you will see that the veins are a little bit wider, thicker than the butterfly that you have on your right hand, which is a male. That the veins are thinner, and in the hind wing, it has 2 black spots that are called stigmata or pheromonal patches. Another thing is that in the rear end of their abdomen, the males have claspers from which they can grab to or hold on to the female when they're mating. Okay, so those are the main differences between male and female. Next. So, talking about this transformation, the butterflies go through different stages from the egg up to the larvae and then the butterfly. So let's review them very quick. Next. So the first stage, which we call it the mating, it actually consists of 2 phases, the aerial phase and the ground phase. So when the butterfly, the male finds the female, it's going to try and trap her down, and that's when it takes it to the ground. And then once the female is not moving anymore, then the male lifts her up in flight, and this can be around 16 to 18 hours, the mating phase. And once they unhook, is when the male passes the spermatophore or a pouch with the sperms and with some lipids or nutrients. And the interesting thing is that the female decides when to use the spermatophore. So once that she is fertilized, she will produce up to 400 eggs, which she will lay one by one per leaf in order to avoid predation among the caterpillars. And how does she decide to put the egg is that she has some needles in her in her feet, which she um, uses in order to put on the leaf and then to perforate, and then she can decide if this leaf is toxic enough or not for the caterpillar or for the egg. So once she lays all the eggs, then next the eggs can take between 3 to 5 days to hatch. And once the larvae comes out, it eats the egg because it's full of nutrients. And then this is pretty much what it's going to be doing for the following days, just eating and eating so it can gain up to 3,000 times its size. So just look at this one. We have all the instars or phases of the larvae. Just for it to get to one or other phase, it has to molt. Okay, so next. This stage can last up to between 13 to 15 days. And in the final stage, when it becomes the chrysalis, it hangs upside down. And then, as you're seeing on this image on the left hand of the presentation, this is very different from the cocoon. So the cocoon, it's kind of like a wrap with silk. And in this case, we're seeing the body that is hardened. So once it's in this stage that you can see on your right hand, it actually has some beautiful golden lines or spots. And these golden spots are light sensors. So this way, the newly formed butterfly knows or can detect the light, and it's kind of like deactivating into when it's going to be ready. So when a butterfly is about to come out, it transforms into transparent. You can actually see the wings in the chrysalis. Next. So once the butterfly comes out of the chrysalis, it has to hang upside down just a little bit, because if you look at this image, you're going to see that the abdomen is quite full, and it's full of lympha or the blood of the insect, and it has to pump this blood into the wings. So once it pumps into the wings, then they expand, and then they have to let it dry for a little bit, and then they're ready to go. And this can take up to 2 hours. So this happens around noon because it is when they can dry faster. Next. So as summary, this is the life cycle of a normal monarch butterfly. And this life cycle is depending on the temperature, and it's between 22 or 37 days. And on your left hand, you can see on the bottom this box that shows you, depending on the temperature of the environment, is how much is going to be each stage, which is very, very interesting. But in general, in average, like 1 month. Okay, next.
Yes. So yeah, just like what Diana was saying, the female needs to find milkweed to lay the eggs, and the caterpillar will feed on the milkweed only. So the distribution of monarch butterfly is associated to the milkweed. We can see on this map the different stages of distribution for the species. Nowadays, we have monarch butterflies pretty much all around the world, but it is native to this area of southern US, northern Mexico. Back on as a species, it has been here for at least 1 million years as a species. But the phenomenon of migration, as we said, is about 20,000 years. We'll go on discussion eventually. So why is so important? We will never get tired of pointing out that the caterpillars need milkweed, that the monarch butterfly is milkweed dependent, because if you only can eat one stuff, that food is critical for your survival. So in this case, for the monarch butterfly, the caterpillar stage needs as a must to eat only milkweed. Once they reach the adulthood, when they become butterflies, they can eat nectar from any type of flower, from any species of flowers. They will sip even a little bit of nectar. They can also drink urine or they can get on the feces of animals and get minerals from there, get nutrients. But they basically eat nectar from any type of flowers. Once again, caterpillars will eat only milkweed. So milkweed is actually toxic. It has some toxins in the sap to prevent the herbivores mostly. So they develop a toxin that is called cardiac glycoside. It is toxic to vertebrates because it affects the sodium potassium bond for the muscles, for the muscle movement. So one of the most important muscles that vertebrates have is the heart. So imagine the effect this toxic can have to the cardiac muscle. So this photo of the blue jay vomiting butterflies is from an experiment from Dr. Lincoln Brower, and they offer monarch butterflies to a blue jay that had never tried them before. After some moments of having the ingestion of that, he felt some effects, and to prevent intoxication, vomited the butterfly and like everything that he had eaten before. After this blue jay was offered more butterflies, monarch and other species that mimic the monarch, and the blue jay refused to eat other butterflies. So, with that in mind, we know, for example, that some species, some predators, will avoid the toxicity of monarch butterflies by just not eating them, or after they try it, by vomiting them. So let's talk about the migratory generation. Diana explained the life cycle of a monarch butterfly as we normally know it: 1 month, 35, 37 days. But what happens with the migratory generation, with the monarch butterflies that are in the North American region, northern US, southern Canada, central part of the US, or the northern part of the Northwest in the US as well? So this specific generation, let's say, is like a super butterfly, has superpowers, because it lives up to 5 times longer than the non-migratory butterflies. It is genetically speaking is the same species, so they have the same genetic pool. They are exactly the same, but they express different phenotypes. That means that the migratory generation of the migratory butterfly is going to be physically different. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be fatter. It's going to be storing larger amounts of fat, and it also expresses different behaviors. As it doesn't get sexually mature, so that means they remain young for longer period of time. They don't produce the growth hormone to develop the sexual organs. They become more social. So that means, for example, the butterflies that you see in your garden during summer or springtime, that they are chasing each other, and sometimes we very romantically think they are in love, and they are just like, oh, see, dancing around with the spring. Usually those are butterflies fighting over the territory. Most of the times those are male butterflies that are fighting over the plants that are in the area. So on the other hand, with the migratory generation of monarch butterflies, they become more social, and they actually gather together in the clusters here in central Mexico. So this is what we were mentioning. The migration really started about 20,000 years ago on the last ice age. And what we know, or what we know from the people that study all of this, from the entomologists that are tracking down all the clues through the years, is that the monarch butterfly actually developed as a species in northern Mexico, southern US, around 1 million years ago. Some of them even say they developed in the Yucatan Peninsula area, the Florida Peninsula area. So in all these areas, when the weather conditions were very different, they evolved together with the milkweed. So they adapt to eat only milkweed to survive and to storage that toxin in their body. So as the climate changed through these thousands and thousands of years, the glaciers start receding, and we had all this new land in North America. So we have uncovered areas, pretty much prairies, grassland, and milkweed found a very nice niche that they colonized. What happened? That the monarch butterfly followed the milkweed to these newly discovered or newly opened prairies. So pretty much this is, if we use our imagination, this is a moment in the past, I don't know, 15,000, 10,000 years ago, in a prairie on North America, with bisons, with giant sloths, mammoths, and the milkweed and the butterflies were there at the same time. What happens there is that we have later the change of temperature once again when the glacier started moving, receding. We have the four seasons here. We have the spring, summer, autumn, but then we have winter and we have snow. The monarch butterfly doesn't find any other food in this area for the caterpillars, remember? So they have to move south. And is when we have the migration. We have, from the North American population, we have, let's say, two different migratory populations. We have the western and the eastern divided by the Rocky Mountains. This is, the Rocky Mountains would be a natural barrier that they have, and since they don't cross, because there is no food, there is no milkweed for them to sustain the different generations to cross from the one side to another, they remain in each one of their sides. So we wanted to show you a little bit of the western population information. They stay on this area on the west side, as we say, of the monarch of the Rocky Mountains. And the monarch winter habitat for the western population is only the Canadian coast, the Pacific, the Canadian Californian coast. So the Pacific coast of California is the one that hosts all these butterflies during winter. Something to note is that they don't roost or overwinter in the same trees as they do here because they don't exist in that area. Hundreds of years ago, they used to overwinter in pine trees, in pine species, different pine species that were on the area. They were logged, new plants arrived, exotic plants were planted, like this eucalyptus, and they adapted to stay in that region because the climate, the weather on the specific areas was benevolent for them. Unfortunately, we know that the numbers are going down, the trend is going down. But well, this is just an example of the Western population. What happens with the Eastern population? We can actually divide the migration on the eastern side in two steps. One step is during summer and spring, and another step will be during fall and winter. The first step to go from the overwintering sites in Mexico to all the North America expansion that they have on this southern part of Canada, the Great Lake areas, central US, north central US, it happens in up to 5 generations. So on the next step, it's only at once with one generation they all come here. To make it more graphic, the spring, summer, fall dispersion happens in different moments. We have the butterflies here, spring arrives, and they move north. They leave eggs, the children, they eclode, and they start moving. So we have the children of the ones in Mexico, then the grandchildren, great grandchildren, and so on. If we consider the ones in Mexico, the parent generation, the original generation, and then giving birth to all of this, or expanding all of this on the North American area. What happens on the other hand? This last generation, let's say late summer, very late summer, or early autumn, they start moving down before winter arrives. Why? Because there's less food, native milkweed goes dormant during winter, and the temperature is very low for them. They are a tropical butterfly. So they just try to come to benevolent weather, similar to that they find, for example, in California, as I mentioned, similar humidity, temperature. They like to be here. Why? Diana, I don't know if you have your mic open.
Thank you. That is a question for a lot of people. Why do they migrate? So this is very interesting. Melissa already told you a little bit about the evolution history or coevolution with the milkweed. And interestingly, here in Mexico, we have up to 50 different species of milkweed, but it is quite scarce in the land. So that's why they keep on following the milkweed as north as the milkweed gets. And also, the interesting thing is that the migration helps to keep the parasite loads low. So the parasite populations never build up because of this movement, and because we're talking about generations that are traveling once they leave their overwintering sites, and that the infected individuals don't complete the journey. So they usually don't make it. So this enhances the fact that the parasites cannot accumulate in time. So next, please. Next. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the overwintering sites. Next. So Mexico is known to be a very highly active um, seismic region. There's a lot of earthquakes, and it has to do with the fact that we have around three tectonic plates around us. So the main country is on the North American plates, but then we have on our left hand the Pacific plates and the Cocos plates. And these are the ones that are enhancing this seismicity activity in the country. And also these tectonic activity is the one that produced next are mountain ridges that we have in our country. So we have mainly three mountain ranges, and we have the Sierra Madre Oriental, which is on green, that comes from north to south on the east part. Then we have one on the west, which is the pink one. And the most recent one, which is 10 million years ago, is the transverse volcanic belt, which is in blue. And it actually unites, it crosses the country. So next, in this transverse volcanic belt, we have up to 13 of the highest peaks in our country. And this is just an example for you. It's in meters, but the highest peak, we're talking about 15,000 feet in height. So this gives you an idea that it is also a very fertile region because of all the eruptions. There's actually some of the peaks that are still active. Next. And since this is one of the highest peaks in our country, it also has to do a lot with the type of vegetation that it has in the surroundings. So here in this map, you can see we have a lot of, actually, we have pretty much all the ecosystems in our country except the tundra. But what is really interesting in this map is that the oyamel forest, and the one in black, you can see them spread out through only the mountain ranges, and they look actually like little islands. So it's not a continuous vegetation, as you can see. And next. We call this as a remnant vegetation. We're talking about dispersed distribution. And here in this map, this is a zoom of two of the main states where we have the monarchs or the colonies of monarchs that they arrive for the overwintering. And they are associated to these forests, oyamel forests, which are the ones that we're seeing in the close-up. And the interesting thing also is that 86% of these oyamel forests are within the protected natural area. Next. So to zoom out a little bit, these colonies are inside of the biosphere reserve of the monarch. And there are some of the colonies that are outside of the biosphere reserve, but mostly we can see that they are between Michoacan and the state of Mexico. And the biosphere reserve is something that started right after the discovery of the monarch overwintering sites. So we're talking about the 1986, 87 that this was kind of like all these activity of preservation of the monarchs and the sanctuaries started. Next. So, talking a little bit about the oyamel fir forests, these forests are temperate forests, and we can find them commonly between more or less 7,000 to 10,000 feet in height. That's why they're associated in this transvolcanic belt where we find these high peaks. They're called evergreen conifers, and what is interesting is that they are in humid areas, high in humid areas of the central Mexico. So in Mexico, we only have two stations, and we have the dry season and the rainy season. So during the dry season, which is mainly in winter, um, since they are in such high elevations, the cloud formations help them to preserve this humidity. And we saw them in the map. It's kind of a island forest spread out through the volcanic belt, and we call it a relict forest. And this is because it comes from the ice age where we had the last glaciation maximum at the end of the part of the Pleistocene, in which the temperature was cooler. So in our left map, we can see how actually the coverage of ice is way larger. And you can see in the country, the open conifer woodland, it's much more extensive than if you see it in the modern vegetation with the map on your right hand. So these forests are relict forests because in the glaciation they were spreaded out and they actually were a continuous from the boreal forest. But nowadays they are remnants and the relict from this ice age. And this is a spot where it actually have the perfect conditions for the monarchs to overwinter. Next. So why here? We're talking about a humid and cold area where the monarchs pretty much come to rest and overwinter. So now they're coming from very, very far, and they don't want to be spending all of their lipid reserves in movement. So that's why they need a cooler environment that will maintain them a little bit less active. If they were in a warmer environment, they would be all the time active and losing all this energy that they need on their way back to the summer areas. And so it has the ideal climate for them to rest and wait out for the winter. And also, we're talking about millions of monarchs coming to this area. So we know by hand that these are toxic butterflies and they have very few predators. But even so, as they co-evolved with the milkweed, there are some predators that have co-evolved in order to be able to eat them. And here in Mexico, they have mainly three predators that are the black-eared mouse, the blackback oriole, and the grosbeak, black-headed grosbeak, and they're going to be attacking the clusters. But even so, the numbers that they can lower down because of predation are not enough to affect the whole population, because once that they travel back and find milkweed, then they can reflourish as a species, as a population, so it doesn't really affect the numbers. So it is a strategy to produce many individuals in order for one of them to be sacrificed, but then the whole species can be saved. Next.
Yes, so just what Diana was saying, the forest on these central mountains is the area where the oyamel forest is a very specific or very limited area, and this is just an example of the vegetation profile on the monarch sanctuaries. This is from near to one of the sanctuaries we visit, Sierra Chinqua, right behind the hills, Sengyo area. And as you can see, we have all these different vegetation associated to the forest on the monarch sanctuaries, but the specific area where the butterflies are is the same area where the oyamel are. So pretty much they at the end they love the same environment. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the oyamel tree, because it's although we have fir trees in other areas, avis from the genus avis in other areas of the world, this one specifically is from Mexico and distributes only in central Mexico and certain parts of the highlands of Guatemala. So it has a very limited distribution in this Mesoamerican area of the continent. um, Usually they are very large, very tall trees. They tend to have a height of 130 feet, but there are some specimens, some individuals that can survive for longer periods of time in healthy conditions, and they can reach almost 200 feet in height. So imagine the size of these huge trees, and all of them together in a forest, mostly of only like monospecific, not very heterogeneous, but mostly homogeneous forest. For the average size of the trunk, of the diameter of the trunk, is around 6 feet. Once again, if they get to manage to live longer and be bigger, they can reach up to 8 or 9 feet in diameter. So they are very massive trees. And a clue to tell if one tree is a young tree or an old tree in the oyamel species is to see the top of the tree. Usually the young trees are more pointy or conical shapes. Meanwhile, the old trees will have like this round semicircular tip on the canopy on the tree. The photos that we have here, the samples of some branches, can tell us why they were named Avis religiosa, the religious fir or the sacred oyamel tree. So the very end of each one of those branches, the very tip of those, divides in 3 points. So it resembles a cross. So people naming, the scientists naming, naturalists saying, well, we will say this tree resembles to the Christian religion, to the Catholic religion. So we have the three tips of the cross. Uh, Besides that, this was also very popular as a Christmas tree. You know, the typical Christmas tree shape. I have one here on the back. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a cone. It's a triangle, and it's the typical shape that we have with the oyamel. Another thing that we can notice on the branches and the structure is that branches that are outside or newer, they tend to be conical, as this one we have in the bottom, central bottom area of the slide, and they tend to have more a lighter green instead of a more bluish, darker green when they are old, as this left bottom image that we have. So even the branches that are older, they are different on the underside and on the bottom. So this upper area, you can see, has a like a brighter color, or let's say cleaner color, is the on the needles, and the bottom side of that exact same branch has like a smoky or grayish color on the underside. So it's something very curious that we just very recently noted in the wild. The oyamel tree is actually, despite being so massive when they are old and having this heterogeneous or homogeneous, I'm sorry, forest, they are very delicate when they are young. They actually need nurse plants. That means they need to grow on the side of a plant that protects them from the weather, from the climate, but also from direct sunlight. So they usually grow under the shade of other oyamels, or under the shade of shrubs or other type of vegetation that is on the area. So this is important because we need to preserve not only the oyamel tree on the Mexican forest, but also the vegetation that grows under the canopy, that grows on the ground level. So they protect the young, the saplings, the young, the oyamels, and they can survive for years. They also like to be on humid areas. As Diana mentioned, we have in Mexico this dry season during winter, and then the rainy season during summer most of the time. But the oyamel prefers the humid soils, but that they need to be well drained. So this means if they are in flooding areas or in areas where there is a river, a seasonal river during summer, they won't survive because the saplings don't tolerate the excessive moist or excessive humidity in the soil. They also need very nutritious soils. They need soils with a lot of organic matter, so they can be feeding on that organic matter. In this central image, what we wanted to show is how to tell the difference between a pine and a fir, and an oyamel fir when you are in Mexico, or when you are also in other forests, when you have pines and firs together. The pines, usually the needle come in a bunch of needle all together. Like here I have a bunch of pens. So pine needles will come all together from one single area. From one single area, you will see 5, 7 needles in a pine. For the oyamel, you will have one oyamel coming separated from the others, as you can see in the central image here. So that's like a trick, a little bit of a trick to tell a fir branch or a pine branch when you are in the wild. And this is something very cool that we want to explain and we want to share with you. The oyamel provides this very specific microclimate for the monarch butterflies. The butterflies uh, cluster or congregate in a certain area, usually in the middle part, a little bit lower middle part of the oyamel trees. In that matter, they are protected from these predators that Diana mentioned, the mouse that is at the bottom, of course, of the forest, and the birds that usually are at the bottom, at the top of the canopy. So they prefer to be in this area, in the central part of the trees. Something very important that we want to point out is what happens when we have a preserved forest and a disturbed forest. When you have a preserved forest, when it is dense, when you have all the oyamels healthy and all together making this compact forest, you have warmer areas within the forest, in the cluster areas. But if you miss some of those oyamels, or if the forest is sick, or we have some deforestation, you have lower temperatures, because pretty much it's like a blanket. You are warm inside the blanket, but if the blanket has a hole, the heat escapes through that hole. So that is why it is important to have preserved forest. These are some photos that Diana took in one of the past trips we had in the season, and it shows you exactly what we see on the clustering. The clusters are in the forest, inside the forest, in the central part, and not only on the branches, but also on the trunk of the trees, of the oyamel trees. So it's not the species what attracts the monarch butterflies, but the environment that they share together. Now, how they get here? Now we all explain like everything they do, where they come, but how they do it. For many years, with many studies that researchers have done, they all come to the conclusion that it is the sun position plus an internal clock. With the big compound eyes, they can see the sun, like the visible light we see, but they can also detect the UV light. They also have an internal clock that all animals have, is the circadian rhythm that we all have, humans do. And the mix of these two tells them what time of the day it is as they feel their behavior, their metabolism. Then they see the sun and they position themselves according to the sun position to go south. This is confusing, so we have this very cool video to show from a butterfly perspective. So if it's mid morning, you are a butterfly, so you position your the sun on your left. If it is late afternoon, you will position the sun on your right. See, this is how you see it with the UV light. Even if it's forecast, if it's a very covered sun, it's the sky, you will see the sunlight. I don't know if that makes sense. We can go back on that on the questions. Other hypotheses that are like very tricky, and you can go on your tiptoes on that because there's nothing proven, is that maybe the minerals on the area, remember we have the transvolcanic belt, we have a volcanic activity around the area of the sanctuaries, and we have mines around the area on the sanctuaries. Some hypotheses say that maybe there's something there that attracts them to the exact same spot every single year. Who knows? Other people say that it is the smell of the ancestors, that they died there, all the pheromones or the chemical trait of all monarch butterflies attracts them to the forest. Who knows? We haven't spoken to butterflies yet to know the truth. So what's going on with the eastern population? Diana, can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is very exciting news, and I think this is pretty much one of the reasons why we also wanted to give this webinar is that the eastern monarch butterfly population has doubled this season, and this is such exciting news because next, if we see the trend of previous years, we were quite worried, to be honest. I mean, look at the season. This is pretty much a graph that shows you the area of the forest occupied by monarch butterflies in Mexico. If you see for 2023-2024 season, we had one of the lowest coverage of monarch butterflies in the forest. And we were truly concerned about this because the previous year that it was low, very, very low, was for 2013, 2014. You can see it, it's even marked in red. So the fact that this season we had the double of number of coverage and monarch butterflies really is good news. It's something to more or less have an idea of how many monarchs are we talking about, because what they do is take into account the coverage of trees that have the monarchs in the colonies. This is 4.42 acres. And there's a study by Thog Martin made in 2017 that he says that per hectare, which 1 hectare is 2.5 acres, we have around 21 million butterflies. So we're talking about this season, more or less, an estimate would be 40 million butterflies. So this is just an awesome news, even though we know that the trend is still diminishing. If we compare it from the 90s, you see that, for example, in the 96, 97, we have 44 acres in coverage. There is a general trend that this is diminishing. And even though we do have the double than last year, the ideal would be to have at least 6 hectares coverage. So, well, we're getting there. We're very, very hopeful for the next season, and this is just great. So we were very excited to be walking in the sanctuary and looking all the coverage of the trees. And when they gave this news, it was like boom. Next, please.
Yes. See, and something that is always a constant question: what's happening with the declining of the butterfly? What are the factors? It's multifactorial. One of the major stuff affecting the butterflies is climate change. Another very important is the loss of milkweed. That's why we were so insisting so much on the milkweed importance. And another is the lack of floral food of milkweed, is the nectar for the migrating adults. So those are like the three main factors that are just being bad, not benevolent for the monarch butterflies. Um, Something that we like to mention is that despite having a lot of problems on the degradation in the Mexican forest, in the overwinter inside, through the years, with the help of non-profit organizations, with the help of the local communities specifically, we have almost vanished or almost disappear the illegal logging in Mexico. So uh, yes, there are problems in this side of the field, but what can help a little bit more is what it's done on the other side with in terms of food resources and well, climate change is something that is here to stay. But what's being done to mitigate or to help the monarch butterflies? There's a lot of land conservation efforts. There's a monarch butterfly fund here in Mexico that provides pretty much like a grant, yearly or bi-monthly grant to local people that is living around the sanctuaries to preserve the forest. Back with you in the US, Canada, there are some highways and some areas that are considered now monarch paths, like the I-35, like the Route 66 in Illinois. So there's a lot of stuff that is being doing. And in terms of climate change specifically, there's something very new from the mid 2000s, like 2017, 19 is when this all started. The assisted migration. So what they are doing is taking some saplings and some seed from the oyamel tree and placing them higher than natural is the range. So they are just making some experiments, and the good news is that this specific is the article that came out just last year. They were successfully transfer saplings from the regular range to a very high altitude, and they survive around 70% of the saplings. So you can take a screenshot of this and Google, because these are all open access to detect. Este, y bueno, Diana, you want to talk about this? You want me
Yes,
to go over?
I think that something that we really like to share with all the people that are visiting us is what can you do? And this is something very important because even though you say like, oh, I'm just one person, but no, if you do something on your side, if we take it as a whole, as a community, I think we can make a change. And part of it would be to create habitat. So native plants are the key. It's been very popular nowadays that they want to plant tropical milkweed, which is the most commercial, but you need to be looking for the specific type of milkweed in your region. And how do you do that? You can go in WWF. There's actually a site where you can see what type of milkweed is the adequate for your garden or for your area where you want to plant it. And also, you can contribute to citizen science programs. And this is very fun because you can, even from tagging a butterfly up to following the migration routes, and also the fact that you can plant and donate. This is very important. And Monarch Watch is just one example. There's many, many more. But we're running out of time. So I think we're gonna leave it here. But we're very, very
Yes.
excited to share this information with you. So thank you.
Melissa, Diana, that was amazing. Wow. I don't know how you crammed so much amazing information in 1 hour. That was phenomenal. We, yeah, we're getting lots of hand claps and everything coming in and lots of excellent presentations. So everybody agrees. So we don't have that much time left, and that's okay. Like I said, you gave so much wonderful information. But we do have a good question about the trips. And since both of you are wonderful expedition leaders of ours, in your opinion, what are the very best weeks to participate in a trip and go see the monarch butterflies?
The very best weeks. Well, if I can start, Diana, and then I'll
Yes,
give you the,
please.
the word. We usually when we want to travel and see this phenomenon so magnificent, and some of us consider this a lifetime journey. or once in a lifetime trip. Usually we tend to think like, oh, I want to be surrounded of butterflies. A lot of people describe it as a snow globe of butterflies, and pretty much that's what we would like to see. But on the other hand, we mentioned they are here to rest, and they are here to be in the clusters and take it easy. So of course, even in the course of the season, at the end of the season, we have a little bit more activity with warmer temperatures. Uh, Throughout the season, we have mostly sunny days, although we get some cloudy and some rain once in a while in some of the weeks. In my very, very personal opinion, I prefer the cloudy and the cold days, so you can really see the clumps of butterflies. Just imagine that in 1 hectare, 20 million butterflies all together. So the branches of the oyamel are coming down because of the way of the clusters. For me, personally, that's like the best time of the season, and that is pretty much on December, January, more or less. So if you want to see that specific behavior that is unique in the world and is very important for the monarch survival, is the early time of the season, the weeks on December and the weeks on January that we have, early January. On the other hand, well, if you want to see the other behavior on activity when they are getting ready to leave, it's later on the season. So I don't know what Diana has to say on that.
Agree with you completely. This behavior, as you're mentioning, is unique in the world, and I think that just taking, just standing there and watching millions of butterflies around you, it's just something spectacular. And also, we want them to rest, so definitely, I agree with you.
Well, thanks for that. So we are nearing or less than 2 minutes. So I will turn it back to you, Melissa and Deanna, for any last closing comments.
Diana, want to start?
Nothing. We're just very happy that we could share this information. We're expecting really good news for the following seasons. We hope that you can join us in the trips. We have excellent expedition leaders, co-workers, and we're very happy to receive people visiting us from around the world. So yes, Melissa.
See, no, this was a webinar that we were thinking about for many times, and for many seasons, several times. Like, we need to talk about the oyamel trees and the parts in Mexico, why they come here, what's so important. Any other questions you have? Well, Brooke will direct you, but get in touch with your adventure specialist, and we will share a lot of this information during our trips and more insights. So thank you for being here today. Come with us, learn more. Thank you very much, Brooke.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you both, Deanna and Melissa. That was such a wonderful presentation. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. Join us Monday for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. And keep an eye out for our Sunday e-news announcement. We did record today's presentation and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.